All right, it is 9 o'clock and we are ready to kick off day 2 of the ATSSA, the Northland chapter of ATSSA's How-To Conference, a mini virtual event. This is day 2. Thank you so much for joining us. We're so pleased that you're here and able to learn about safety and saving lives. My name is Dale Hegland. I'm with the North Dakota LTAP team, and so privileged and honored to spend the morning with you and share a little bit. This event is brought to you by the Northland chapter of ATSSA, the North Dakota LTAP team, the local technical assistance team, and by the way, Minnesota and South Dakota are part of that LTAP team too, so thank you to each of the states if you would, and then SRF and John and his team for helping to put this together. As you know, last year we were not able to hold the ATSSA How-To Conference, and again, moving to this year, we couldn't. And so the ATSSA board asked if there was some way to deliver a few of the safety topics that really need to get out to help all of us create better, safer roads. So we're so pleased that we get to share a few topics with you and that you're joining us today. Today we're going to talk about work zone safety, some of the violations, some of the risks, and some of the things that we can do to make work zones better. And then we're also going to talk about pavement markings. What's new in the world? What works? Where should we be heading in the future? So 2 great presentations today, and then just a growing from our 1993 startup where this whole how-to got going. Reminder that the PDH form will be put on the Q&A section. So if you need PDH forms or credits, that will be on, along with the Road Scholar report. And we'd ask that you return those back to us. If you're in Minnesota, please, if you would, note that you're from Minnesota. And if you're in North Dakota, do that so that we can credit your account. And if you would, if you have multiple people in the room, list everyone that's in the room so we can duly recognize your learning accomplishments. If you'd use the Q&A to put in questions, to put comments, we'd love some interaction for our speakers. They are subject matter experts and they really want to help hand off information to help you learn. And as you know, if you're thinking of a question, there's others in the audience that have that same thought. So please add in. This event is being recorded. The presentations and the recording will be posted on the LTAP website. Next week, it'll be out. We'll send a notice out. So please, if you need to refresh your memory, if some of your teammates or colleagues weren't able to attend, reference them to the recording so they can learn too and we can help save lives. Want to big shout out to Dustin Ulmer, who is with our Upper Great Plains group. He's in the background. He's the one that's made all this happen. He did all the testing and got us going. So thank you, Dustin, for doing that. On your agenda, you're going to find, and we'll put in the Q&A too, a bonus section from MnDOT's permanent signing group. And it is information, if you look on there, changes to signed plans, MASH 16, by Steve McBurney from Minnesota DOT. If you reference that YouTube learning session, you're going to find a wealth of information that division has recorded and captured. So more learning opportunities for you there. To kick us off, we're going to start right away with a powerful presentation by John Jacobs and Tim Parkos. And John, a little intro to our speakers. John is with SRF. He's a graduate of the University of Minnesota with a Bachelor's of Science in Civil Engineering. He's a registered professional engineer and was with the North Dakota. Wow, John, I think you're one of my teammates. That's how closely we work together. He was with the Minnesota DOT for 39 years before moving to SRF, where he is an expert in all of the safety aspects, and he has a strong passion for tapping into technology, for making improvements, for advancing, and he's going to share some of that passion with us today and some of his outreach efforts. And joining him will be Tim Parkos. Tim is a senior engineering tech with Washington County in Minnesota. Tim celebrates 30 years with the Washington County Department this year. Congratulations, Tim. And he's worked in several departments throughout his tenure, but his real passion is what he's been doing for the past 6 years in the right-of-way compliance and primarily the work zone safety. He performs hundreds of work zone safety reviews, audits, and wants and has a strong desire to make sure that we all get through those construction zones safely. So we've got a couple of outstanding presenters, subject matter experts. Please use the Q&A section to ask questions and add comments. We'd love to have some of that interaction. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to John and to Tim to give us a message on how to address work zone, TTC, and safety standard violations. John and Tim, it's yours.
Thank you, Dale. Good morning to everyone. I'm going to start out this morning, and John Jacobs, and share with you some information to start this, and then we'll feed into Tim and give you some real practical knowledge and things that are going on, and then tie it all up. As Dale mentioned, it's hard to be interactive on virtual meetings, but we're willing to do that. So if you type in the Q&A, Dale is really good at interrupting us, and we'll answer the questions on the spot that you have and share that information with everyone. As mentioned, this is a virtual event this year instead of being in Fargo, where we can actually collaborate and share experiences. So it's a little missing a few parts there, and hopefully in 2022, everyone can join us in Fargo for the 30th How-To Conference. Basic theme this morning that Tim and I are going to share is see something, say something. It's very important to do that, and that'll be the theme that carries us through this. We're going to talk a little bit about work zone safety and the standards that apply for that, training that might be available. I'll toss it over to Tim to talk about experiences in Washington County and give you some good hints on how to move it forward at your agency and your area, and how to approach those non-compliant traffic controls that you find. And if you don't have a program, how to establish or improve the program that you have. We'll tie that up. So hopefully give you some tools to use with that. And if you can share some good ideas with us, we can share those with everyone else as we go. What really spurred this on and got this started is the fact that every time we get together and talk about temporary traffic controls or work zone traffic controls, everyone's got a story to tell about things that they've seen that aren't quite right and don't know what to do about it. And so I think that's where we're going to go today and try to address that and maybe give some tools out there that we can make improvements in work zones. Why are work zones important? I'm going to talk a little bit about crash statistics, and just to highlight this from a national level on down to the local level this morning. It takes time to collect all this data on the national level. So a lot of times you see things that are 1 or 2 years old, and that's about as current as we can get. In 2018, there were 123,000 crashes in highway work zones, resulting in 45,000 injuries in those work zones. And I'm going to move it forward to 2019 because the fatal crash statistics are a little easier to get a handle on. They're reported quicker through the FARS, which is Fatal Accident Reporting System at the national level. In 2019, there were 842 fatalities in highway work zones across the country. 133 of these were pedestrian fatalities and 135 were worker fatalities. So approximately 16% were pedestrians and 16% were highway workers. All of those numbers are totally unacceptable to all of us in the industry, and we want to move towards zero death. One thing I want to note here is the truck involved ones. Large commercial vehicles are over involved in fatal crashes. And it only makes sense that they would be. They're large vehicles. They cause a lot of damage when a crash occurs. And that's a real special emphasis area that we have to focus on, is how to address that. Bringing it to a local level and closer to home for all of us, looking at 2019 fatalities in work zones in North Dakota, they experienced 4 fatalities, and 1 of them was a worker. South Dakota in 2019 had 3 fatalities, and in Minnesota, 11 fatalities. So it goes pretty much along the lines of the population. There's more people and more traffic in Minnesota, so we see the numbers that are a little bit higher. They're very similar numbers every year. They don't move much, and that's a challenge to us in moving towards zero death. These numbers have to move to zero. And I think that's what we need to look at. And that's why Tim and I have picked to see something, say something. If you see something that's wrong out there, say something to the right people, and let's get that corrected before we have these crashes and fatalities out there. Now that's a lot of numbers. What can we learn from those numbers? What's going on, and how do you look at things in the future and try to balance out where are the important areas to look at? And especially this year, we can't meet in Fargo, and we should be there right now today. So what impact did the pandemic have on these fatal crashes in 2020? I can't speak to all the states, but I've got very good data from Minnesota. Looking at that, and let's look at the impact that the pandemic had on work zone crashes. Overall, reduction in travel resulted in reducing all crashes by 31% in the state of Minnesota. So it shows a 16% reduction of crashes in work zones. However, that's half of the reduction that we saw on the rest of the highways here in Minnesota. And it just implies that there's a prevalence of work zone crashes. Crashes are up in work zones compared to other roadways. And drilling in a little bit deeper and looking at those crashes that are really meaningful, and those are the fatalities. Across the whole entire system, fatalities decreased 7% in the state of Minnesota in 2020, but they increased 2% in work zones. That's unacceptable. It shows the prevalence is up on that. What can we draw from that? What does that really tell us? It's really safe to say that traffic crashes in work zones during 2020 were lower than previous years. So if you just look at the raw numbers, it's going to look like we had a good year. However, that reduction was half of what would be expected out there. And why is that happening? It's been concluded that the biggest reason for that is vehicle speeds are up in work zones. With less traffic, the vehicle speeds are up. When there is a crash, they're more severe. And just goes to it's just common sense that would happen. While providing proper traffic controls on all projects won't eliminate or reduce all of these crashes, it's well-known fact that proper traffic controls have a positive effect in reducing the number of crashes and also the severity of those crashes. When people know what to expect and how to behave, it does reduce crashes. So having proper temporary traffic controls is definitely a good first step to moving these numbers towards zero. I want to talk a little bit about work zone standards. It's very important to understand what the standards you have in your jurisdiction, your location, and your state. So let's start at the state level. All states are required to adopt traffic control standards that are in substantial compliance with the federal manual on uniform traffic control devices. To do this, many states adopt the federal manual in its entirety. Others adopt it with a supplement standard, and while others adopt their own MUTCD. We're lucky in the tri-state area here with North and South Dakota and Minnesota because we have all three. In Minnesota, they write their own state MUTCD that is in substantial compliance with the federal manual. North Dakota adopts the federal manual with a state supplement, while South Dakota adopts the federal MUTCD. You have to be aware of all those statewide standards when you're working in those states. And not only that, there are local standards that are in effect in different jurisdictions. And if you're going to be providing temporary traffic controls, it's best that you understand those standards and what has to happen. One of the issues that I know that my friend Tim is going to bring up this morning is that the national companies that move into the state to do work don't understand these local standards, and it causes some problems in those work zones. Every work zone needs a temporary traffic control plan. But be careful when I say that. It doesn't mean that all work zones need specific layouts and plan sheets that are put together. Many short-term and intermediate-term work zones, excuse me. Many short-term and intermediate-term work zones utilize typical applications that are available to provide guidance on what traffic controls are needed. Even so, these must be applied by individuals that have knowledge and experience in adopting these layouts to specific situations. They have to make sure that the layout that they choose is proper for their application and that they're adjusted so they provide safe travel for motorists, pedestrians, and bicycle riders, as well as providing a safe workspace for all of the highway workers that are out there. Longer term or complicated applications often require formal temporary traffic control plans that are developed and signed by a professional engineer to follow that to ensure that the traffic controls are appropriate. In any case, it's essential that these plans meet the requirements of the governing road authority, making sure that where you're working, it meets all the requirements and standards of that governing road authority, and that workers keep records of these plans and document any revisions or adjustments that are made to typical application of specific plans. One of the first reasons people talk about is the liability. If issues arise, what do we know about what did we have there and why did we have it there? That's a very important thing, but it's also important that you keep those records for making future improvements in the standards in your agency, in your area, that you have a record that you have issues, you have resolved those issues and make those changes. And I think that's one of the powers of the how-to conference. We get together and talk about those things, identify areas that need improvements. And again, Tim is going to talk a little bit about that in Washington County and the program that they've put together this morning. How do you get knowledge? How do you learn about standards and where they apply and how they apply specific situations? There's many temporary traffic control trainings that are available. In fact, there's so many it gets confusing at times. I could have filled 20 slides with all the different courses that are available. I listed the 3 LTAP centers that are working with us on this, and go to them. It's a great resource for what training is available. They can reach out to other places for you and give you great assistance in looking for that. There's national courses that are available that speak directly to the national MUTCD. Some of those courses have been adopted to state-specific courses and standards in the different states. Minnesota has a very strong work zone training program that's available to everyone, and that's being currently looked at for revision and improvement. And it's available for field level managers and designers and field workers, giving them techniques to adjust these traffic controls to make sure they have a safe work zone. As I started out saying, the big theme of this morning is see something, say something. It's just like we do at the airports, and if you see something wrong, say something to someone. I feel that as a trained and knowledgeable and experienced traffic control professional, all of us have obligations to bring these deficiencies to the attention of the proper authorities. Not everyone knows everything that's going on their highways. When we see something wrong, we should bring that to the proper authorities. Knowing what to look for and how to inform those appropriate officials is not an easy task, but it's essential to protect the lives of motorists and workers alike. I want to just focus on 4 things that are on my checklist that I really have to look at every time I drive through work zones. Lack of or no advanced warning. Very important to provide advanced warning to motorists as they approach a work zone, even in low volume roadways where there's good sight distance. We always talk about distracted drivers and how bad that is in the work zone area. And it's a huge issue that we're working on every day to try to solve. But if you don't have advanced warning, you're not even trying to get the attention of those drivers. And I think it's very important that we do that all the time. It's incumbent on us to have advanced warning, especially on rural high-speed roadways. Flagging is a very important task. It's very difficult to control two-way traffic in a single lane and to do that properly. And too often we see improper flagging, the location of the flagger, the way the flagger is operating and what's going on in that operation is very important, because the flagger's life, not only is a flagger's life at risk, but they're the last safety valve, if you will, for workers, for people that are coming into that work zone. Something that people don't think of in temporary traffic controls very often, that's edge drop-offs. Edge drop-offs in these areas, especially when we're asking people to change lanes and move around in the work zone, are very dangerous, especially high-speed roadways. They tend to cause drivers to overreact when they go over that edge. And what happens is that they lose control of their vehicle, cross into opposing traffic, or in worst case, leave the roadway and hit a fixed object or roll over in that area, cause a lot of fatalities. They're very important. And the last piece that I want to talk to that will be not talked about in the work zone specific thing, but the importance of pavement markings to lead you through those work zones and conflicting pavement markings. For short-term work zones, we don't change the pavement markings, but you just have to use enough cones and barrels and other devices out there to provide that good guidance to the driver to overcome those pavement markings. And in some cases on longer term markings are not removed and they lead the driver down the wrong path. It's very important to look at that. I'm going to take a break right now and hand the presentation over to Tim Parkles from Washington County and let him talk a little bit about how they address this in Washington County.
Good morning, everyone. Introduction here to Washington County a little bit. We're a county of around 260,000 people and very committed to ensure right-of-way users are compliant to work zone safety standards, utilizing an inspection and reporting process. This process requires commitment from upper management. In order to gain that commitment, positive results of your efforts to ensure work zone safety and right-of-way compliance will be supported by management. All agencies, regardless of size, will experience temporary traffic control. Field inspections and written documentation are the tools for a successful program. Who provides the temporary traffic control? Well, I've cited 4 areas here: municipalities, county forces, private contractors, traffic control vendors. So there's a variety of folks out there doing this. Not all of them have the same methods of operation, and so we're going to kind of talk a little bit about that here. Temporary traffic control implementation is derived from a variety of sources: municipalities, private contractors, and temporary traffic control vendors. Field inspections are conducted to ensure that all right-of-way permittees are meeting the standards. Remember, non-compliant work zones must be corrected in a timely fashion as outlined in both permit requirements and contract specification, as well as federal guidelines. Government entities must lead by example, ensuring that all temporary traffic control setups are at or above required standards. It is extremely difficult to address a non-compliant work zone when a mile away your municipality has set up a non-compliant work zone. One more thing on traffic control companies here is to ensure that when these work zones are complete, that the traffic control devices are removed from the roadway or the right of way. They just shouldn't be out there any longer than necessary, especially during the summer months when things are really busy. It just confuses drivers. So work with your company or inspector and make sure that that stuff gets out of there once it's done. Talk a little bit here about legal responsibility, a temporary traffic control provider, public agency. In the event of a work zone crash or incident, the right-of-way permit holder, contractor, will be the initial contact for legal action resulting from the incident. Based on case study, the legal action often will involve the government entity who issued the permit. Crashes will occur regardless of how correct a work zone is set up. It is incumbent upon the road authority to ensure when crashes occur, it is not due to a non-compliant work zone. Once you have observed the infraction, it is your responsibility to ensure that it is reported and documented. Looking the other way only puts yourself and your agency at risk of litigation. Obvious work zone non-compliance, which is an imminent danger to the driving public, must be dealt with as soon as possible. This is where we need to establish, if you don't have a protocol established already, make sure you have something in line there, or who to call and who handles these type of incidents. I'll just give you a little overview on how we approach non-compliant temporary traffic control non-compliance. Okay. Permit review. Once you stop at the site and make sure that you're parked properly and you got your lights on and all that business, ask for the on-site foreman supervisor, introduce yourself and your reason for your visit. An example would be a random inspection of a non-compliant work zone, etc. Ensure that the permit holder is in possession of an up-to-date right-of-way permit. This will include an approved traffic control plan if required. In the event you are familiar, well, no, sorry about that, 1 minute. In general, the traffic control plan will be required when any part of the traffic lane will be affected to include any altered pedestrian access routes. It is important that you are familiar with the temporary pedestrian access route requirements, TPAR. Make sure you take a look at that because that's part of a traffic control plan and very important. Ensure that right-of-way permit dates are current. So if your municipality or agency issues these permits, make sure they're up to date and they're not a year out, and things can change in that time with that roadway, and that's why the permits need to be current. Photos or video are an imperative aspect of work zone inspection in order to document both non-compliant and compliant work zones. It's important not to focus always on non-compliance, but give credit where credit's due. You're out there, your municipality's doing a great job. Make sure that that supervisor's aware of it by email. Make sure that he transfers it to the staff. So we create buy-in with work zone safety. Work zone inspection forms are widely available and are a crucial part of the inspection process. The inspection form that you pick, like I said, there's hundreds of them on the internet. Just pick one that you feel is simple enough, but more so that people will use. Discuss any non-compliance in the field with the on-site foreman supervisor. Explain your findings and needed corrections. A field manual, both for reference and field education, is an excellent tool. Make sure to have those with, in our case here, I have a box of them and I'll hand them out if the site foreman doesn't have one. That way everybody's on the same page with what you're looking for on the next visit. Revisit the work zone in accordance with the established and agreed upon time frame to ensure the non-compliance was corrected. Going to continue here with non-compliant zones through contract operations. All state and local government contracts will contain a section on temporary traffic control, dependent on the work to be performed. Many agencies will have a construction inspectors assigned to these projects. It is important to establish a dialogue with the inspectors to ensure that temporary traffic control non-compliance issues are addressed. The inspector will be in possession of the assigned traffic control plan, which has been previously approved by the traffic engineer as designee. Although the contractor is primarily responsible for associated traffic control, it is the inspection process that holds the contractor accountable. Please raise your hand with any questions as we continue here, and we'll address those as we go. Third slide on this of non-compliance, internal county maintenance operations. As discussed previously, it is incumbent upon your jurisdiction to lead by example. The daily work plan, daily activity sheet of your organization should reference the appropriate layout for the work to be completed that day. Field staff deploying temporary traffic control should be familiar and trained to ensure that your agency is setting up a compliant work zone. There are many training venues available, both online and in person, annually, as John discussed earlier. Setting up a non-compliant work zone is a recipe for potential litigation. Take the time not only to properly set up your work zone, but ensure the layout is completely set up prior to use. This is a big one, and you see this all the time. where contractors or whoever wants to get started before that work zone is set up. Make sure that the work zone is set up, it complies with the traffic control plan or a manual, and everything's in place before they start working out there. This should include written inspection and a drive-through. As photos, video, all of that stuff is a great tool to ensure that this occurs. And I think I'll turn it back to John at this point.
Hey, Tim, this is Dale. I just want to jump in, and that manual from MnDOT is absolutely fantastic. And I know your practices are a little different than North Dakota, but I use that often. I'm so glad you referenced it and are using it.
Thank you, Tim.
All right, thanks, John.
As Tim had mentioned, you know, it's important that you have standard operating procedures, processes, policies, whatever terms you want to use for that in your agency. And I want to take a few minutes here to talk about how you can establish that in your agency, or if you have practices, to make sure that they're up to date and effective in making sure you have good temporary traffic controls and safe work zones. Let's step back a little bit from temporary traffic control and talk about, have you ever attempted to change a policy or procedure in your organization? I want to talk a little bit about some steps that would help you to do that. Now, this isn't the only way to do it, but it's a way that works fairly well. It's very important to follow the practices that you have in your agency, and Tim outlined a lot of those in Washington County, and I'm sure that there's a whole nother book full of them that he left on the side that apply to this type of work. But the goal is to make improvements and make sure that we have temporary traffic controls that are compliant to the standards and that are set up properly for the location and for the work that's being done. The first step in understanding that is you have to identify what the problems and issues are. When you see something out there, whether that's a problem on the roadway with temporary traffic controls, or it's an issue or a problem with the standards and procedures that you have, it's just identify that and understand how that impacts everything else. And this focuses back to our see something, say something concept to lead to improvements in these traffic controls. Then the next step is to identify any barriers to making changes or improvements in that, and then understand and discuss issues. This is not a task for a single individual, and I'm going to stress that many times this morning. And then work together with everyone on your team to make improvements in your process. As Tim had mentioned, some of these things you come upon are going to need immediate corrective action because they provide a very high level of risk to both the workers and the motorists and the bicyclists and the pedestrians. First, it's important to not only know your current agency policies, but to understand the basis and reasons for these policies and practices. This is not easy. They're not always readily apparent. It's important to have discussions regarding these reasons with the managers and your supervisors and everyone in the agency, so you can identify those barriers to resolving these issues. When developing or making changes to policies or procedures, you have to consider the impacts that these changes have in many different areas. The best way to accomplish this is to work with all the stakeholders, everyone involved in this, and discuss the impacts, ensure that the implementation of new practices will not have an unintended negative effect. It also helps everyone that you work with to understand why these changes are important and what those issues are that need to be addressed, and the role that they can play in affecting improved safety in these work zones. Let me take a little bit of time to examine these before suggesting changes to a policy. It's necessary to understand why they exist. I have to stress that over and over. It's a mistake that commonly is you don't understand why. Some of that's resource management. In your agencies, you have to budget your worker availability. You have to budget restrictions that need to balance mobility needs with needs to improve or repair the transportation system. And this is not to say that safety takes a back seat. Your safety has to take a front seat to all of these needs, but you have to find that correct balance in how you address this. And you have to consider that when developing a practice or a policy and how to address these non-conformance issues that you discover. Once these needs are understood, you can work on making improvements in those practices and procedures and make them smoother. And I'm sure that Tim will reiterate this, that everyone has his phone number in Washington County. And when they see something, Tim gets many phone calls and is able to respond appropriately for that. So those are some of the key issues with that. In simple terms, with all of this, work within your system, rely on experience and knowledge of others, just like I mentioned with, call Tim, that's his job to do enforcement in Washington County. And that's within your system, also outside your organization or your agency. And Tim had mentioned that, stop and talk to the supervisor on the job site. They're the ones that are experienced in that. They know why they did things, have that discussion. Discuss options for improvement and the outcomes of implementing those changes, and develop a consensus between the people in the organization and the people, the contractors out there on the roadway, so that those changes benefit everyone. Once you have a good system in place, it's incumbent on everyone to be vigilant and report these issues, such as non-conforming temporary traffic control, to the proper individuals. In some instances, as Tim mentioned, it will be necessary to make these contacts immediately and perhaps take immediate corrective action if there's a threat to traffic safety or worker safety. For example, if you have a lane closure on a 2-lane roadway with no advanced signing or no flaggers that assign the right of way, you can't just drive back to the shop to report that. You have to stop and make sure that corrective action is taken, either removing the work from the roadway or getting the proper traffic controls in place immediately. I wish we were together in Fargo because we could have a good discussion about this. What has worked for you and your agency and your company? What suggestions do you have for others? And we share those. And what roadblocks have you encountered? And that's what we miss about the in face-to-face contact that we have getting together. But hopefully this has given you some ideas and sharing that. And what I want to open up with right now is that Tim and I are always available. The contact information is shown. It will be on the recording here. When you have these issues and concerns or want some ideas, both of us are easy to talk to and get a hold of, as well as the LTAP centers, all of the Northland chapter members. And you can go to the Northland ATSSA website. They have a contact us site. So you're not alone in this. If you have issues, there's a lot of people to reach out to that have experience in this area that can help you move that forward. And again, just to reiterate, when you see something that's wrong, say something to the right people. Make sure people are aware of that out there. Dale, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you, John. Thank you, Tim. So Tim, you are the chair of the Washington County Towards Zero Death, the TZD Coalition. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yes, and I'm pretty sure that exists in the outlying states there, or something similar. It's not always called Towards Zero Death, but each county here in the metro area, anyway, here, and there's different sections around our state, have a TZD coalition. And this involves law enforcement, engineering, emergency services, et cetera. And we have bi-monthly meetings and do specific initiatives or design them, different things like maybe at your county fair, with different seatbelt initiatives, things like that. We've done older driver, when to talk to the older driver, things like that. But the TZD coalition is a good way to keep in touch with everyone and kind of keep the ball rolling, towards zero death, consistent with this works on safety business.
Wonderful. And in North Dakota, we're partnering with the Northland chapter of ATSSA on to a different topic with the Spot on Safety program. You showed some of in your presentation, some of the good things, some of the shortcomings of traffic control layouts, flagging. And surprisingly, we're still coming upon sites that have people without vests, without the high vis on, and it's alarming. So our spot on safety program is this, and we have counties that do it, and I am sure others in the audience do. And if you don't, it's a good thing to start. We carry extra vests. Our vests are actually logoed with spot on safety, and we carry a postcard that says, "Hey, North Dakota LTAP and your Northland chapter of ATSSA care. We want you to get home safe every night. Here's a vest. Please put it on. You're in a dangerous position. We want you to get home every night." I know that one of our counties here, Burleigh County, if they see somebody along the road, it could be in a narrow roadway where a pedestrian, a bicyclist, not only workers, if they see that they are at risk, they will stop and hand off a vest. So, wow, it's work zones and it's outside work zones. We need to help people understand how to get home safe every night. So, John, if you could, you have a very strong advocacy toward using new technologies, smart technologies to make enhancements in work zones. Can you share some of your thoughts and what you're thinking, doing?
Absolutely, Dale. I've moved over from pavement marking and work zone arena probably 12, 13 years ago now into the ITS, or Intelligent Transportation Systems. And one of the things that kind of drove that forward is, I think that's our future, to address some of these things and drive this towards zero. I had mentioned in my remarks that it's been pretty level. It's been, the same number of fatalities out there, and that's unacceptable to me. And I mentioned also distracted driving. Every time I talk to someone that's out on the roadway, the biggest problem is distracted driving. Used to be speeding driving. Okay, speeding is still an issue, but that used to be the #1 thing that field workers would get. But now it's distracted drivers, and what do we do? And I think that really looking out on the horizon of the future is getting into that vehicle is the only way to know, is this driver distracted, and how do we deal with that? Some of the new things that are already in vehicles, they help them with lane keeping and collision avoidance, and those types of things are going to help with that and give alerts. And when we get to connected vehicles, can we broadcast a message to the driver to make them aware that they're approaching a work zone or approaching an area, even a sharp curve that's bad. And so that's one of the reasons I moved over to that. In the meantime, how do we get there? And what can we use today to move that forward? And there are some systems out there. Iowa, I'll give a couple of examples. Iowa lost one of their workers this year that was driving a TMA blocker truck, and he was killed because it was hit by a commercial vehicle. What's the answer to that? The answer to that is to get that person out of that blocker truck and automate that. Colorado DOT is leading a pool fund study to do just that. There's some of those vehicles available today so that you can take the worker out of that truck. Flaggers are always at risk, as I had mentioned, and protocol is very important, but even the best protocol and the best standards and doing it right, you're exposed to that traffic hazard. How do you make that better for flaggers? Get the flaggers off the roadway, use automated flagger assist devices, use portable signals and things, put equipment out there to do that job and control that traffic and move the flagger away from that high risk area. That also has the advantage, Dale, of giving you some improved productivity. Instead of flagging traffic, that person can be on the crew doing the repair and the patching and get that done faster and get off the roadway, reduce that exposure. And I think it's moving a lot of different ways. So there's technology available. That's why I moved to that area and continue to work on that. The challenge that we all have is, how do you invest millions and millions of dollars in developing that technology and getting industry involved in that, because they don't see the return on investment for highway work zones. It's not a large market. It's our market. It's where we live. It's important to us. And so that's our challenge with that arena. The ATSSA members have done very well. We've worked with ATSSA members for many years on developing that. A lot of the ATSSA member companies and manufacturers are building things like smart arrow boards now and putting together connected temporary traffic signals and moving those technologies forward, making them more affordable for public agencies and contractors.
Wow. John, I wanted to, as long as we're talking about flagging operations, I've got a couple minutes here. This past year or the year before, we purchased portable rumble strips to be deployed prior to flagging operation, prior to the flagger. And they really have some positive results. And we talk a little bit about distracted driving and things like that. But this wakes them up and makes them look to the side, look up, see the advanced warning sign, and they know what's coming. So portable rumble strips, although a little bit cumbersome and not, the easiest to work with, but they're fairly light, fairly simple, 2-guy operation, load right up. I'm a believer in portable rumble strip because it gives them that physical feel that there's something going on out there.
Wow, love that tip, Tim. Thank you very much. In North Dakota, we embrace the portable rumble strips. Absolutely, what you're saying is so valuable. Love it. So Tim, a different question for, each state's a little bit different. For Minnesota, what your traffic control supervisor certification, who's got it? What does it entail? If you could give us kind of an overview.
MnDOT does a certification on it. It has to be done every 5 years or so. So it's the next step. You go beyond your general work zone safety training, and but MnDOT has this course, and I believe it's offered nationally too, the certification course, and I think that's a good first step. If you're going to have somebody in the field looking at this stuff, they should certainly have that traffic control certification or supervisor certification on that. And I think if I've got it correctly in our contracts, that we require the contractor to have somebody that has this on staff when we issue a contract.
Wonderful. So part of John's see something, say something tagline is that, as we're driving down the road or we're looking at something, it would be easy to continue on, to not say anything, right? That's the easy mark, but it's our responsibility. We know the right thing to do. And so John, I'll come back to you, but first, Tim, it almost is a parallel to your inspection for the work zones. Are your team members at first thinking, oh my goodness, this is laborious and we really don't need to do it? Or is your team fully embracing it and saying, you know what, we're not doing this just to do paperwork, but we're doing it to actually try to make a difference, to help people recognize those shortcomings. We're not trying to throw them under the bus, we're trying to help make corrective actions. Is it viewed positively with your team in that see something, say something concept?
Absolutely, and it's been a few years in the development. Everybody's a little shy on the front end, but once they have an avenue for this, once they know who to call, and they're, it's not going to turn into some kind of anxiety thing. They call, or they'll stop, or they'll photo and send a photo of it. And if photos and videos, they're just so easy now, that can be done anywhere. But it's just providing that venue that's comfortable for everybody to get that information out there. So it's kind of a little clearinghouse for complaints, so to speak.
Love it. Love it. Love it. That approach works. It's not just paperwork. It's that TZD effort. Thank you. John, can you expand a little bit on your thoughts on how you develop that tagline?
It's difficult. It's as Tim had talked about, if you have a process in your agency, and we talked a little bit in our presentation about how you might improve your process and develop that, so at home, it's easier than it is when you're just traveling around. And I think that, when you're driving through an area where you don't work and you see something that's wrong, when I was working out in the field, I really valued having that information come back. I would much rather have someone say the traffic controls out here need to be looked at than having someone call and say we just had a crash and some people died. And say something to people using that information. You can't tell them what to do. You make them aware of what's happening and let them take the corrective action. It's just a matter of who do you call And, you know, I think we need to build that network a little bit. And I think, you know, Northland chapter members are one way to do that. The companies that provide temporary traffic controls are usually members of the chapter. And I've made a lot of phone calls to the people that operate those companies and say, I just drove through a work zone on this highway and I saw this. You might want to have someone take a look. And, you know, so that's one way to do that. Another way is to contact the agency. If you know it's a Washington County job, now we know Tim and we've got his phone number. So, you know, we can do that. So it's just that building that network and being able to do that and making people aware of what's happening. We get complaints from the public all the time. Public agencies do, you know, and they need to respond to that. But we have a better eye than the general average driver. We're trained in traffic control. We know what the issues are. We give better information as to what the issue is and what should be looked at. Thanks, Dale.
Dale, I think one other and John, important point on that is, you know, the last thing you need is for the public to see you driving by a non-compliant work zone in a county vehicle. That just doesn't work out very well in the end for anyone. So it's your responsibility to report this also, to ensure that everybody's on the same page.
Yep. One of our county leads always referenced that as we're out in the field, we're in a fishbowl. We're being watched all the time, and you're right. Yeah, we're held to that standard, and we should be. That's who's, you know, the taxpayers are paying our way. So that's a fair review. You know, I mentioned.
I'm sorry.
Well, I mentioned your TTC book. I love this, and I'm so proud of North Dakota DOT. They're just wrapping up their revision, which we'll have out shortly. So we'll have an updated handbook too. So thank you. You know, I'd like to mention one other book that we took in from Minnesota, and that's the Red Book. And the Red Book is that safety trigger every morning that a crew will assess what they're doing on the roadway and think about and acknowledge and plan for those safety things so that the whole crew gets back. And two things that I'd like to say, a shout out to Trail County, one of our counties, in that they not only do that up front, they do that when they come back. They do a debriefing and say, hey, what went wrong today? What could we have done better today? What were the near misses? Again, it just comes back to self-preservation and making sure that you, your team are home, that the public is home. And on the back, I'll read you what we did. We took the Minnesota DOT, and thank you, Minnesota DOT, for allowing us to share this in North Dakota. And our closing quote is, the Red Book and Safety Creed were adopted from MnDOT because safety knows no boundaries. And I think we need to share that, and that's why we have SRF here. We've got the county here. It doesn't matter from the public's perspective, from our perspective. It's important. John, it looks like you'd like to share something. Oh, no? Okay.
No.
Okay. And one more thing, we in North Dakota, unfortunately, 2 years ago, had a fatality on a county network, putting up traffic control devices. And the issue really involved parking in the wrong direction on the wrong side of the road. And, you know, we're always taught to steer to the right to avoid an oncoming vehicle, right? And we make that corrective action. And so not only following the policies or the layout, but the practices of the correct installation patterns are so critical. We're in war zones. We're in traffic control areas. We've got to have a plan and follow it clearly. So this has been great. Tim, John, anything else you'd like to add?
Just a quick one on that, Dale. On these work zones out there, and you were just talking about 2-lane, 2-way, pretty narrow rural operation, and probably what happened out, something similar. It's important to keep all those work vehicles, contractors, our work vehicles, whatever, on one side of that roadway, one shoulder. They don't get to pull up and go on the other side. That just complicates everything. And they should all be within their work zone on that side and all have their lights on, their overhead lights on. That's another one that we miss a lot. That's all I had on that.
Yeah, lights are not that expensive, even on our LTAP vehicles, when we head out, we throw an extra light on top of the vehicle. $100 is with powerful lighting that you get now. Well, this has been a wonderful handoff of information. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, John. And with that, let's kick into the next presentation on pavement markings. Pavement markings, there's a lot of changes that have been happening. Minnesota is one of our leaders. So to help us learn a bit more, or quite a bit more, we've got two experts. We've got Ethan Peterson. Ethan has been with the Minnesota DOT since 2016, and he is the state pavement marking and crash worthy engineer. Ethan, I gotta ask, the crash worthy engineer, did you have to go through any crash testing personally to get that title? Maybe not. He's got.
I did not. I did not.
Good. Well, we're glad to have you here. I don't think it would have fared well.
Yeah, no, exactly. Oh.
But Ethan has his bachelor's of civil engineering from the University of Minnesota, and before he went to work for the Minnesota DOT, he worked for private industry for over 5 years on traffic impact studies. So glad you're able to bring that wealth of knowledge to us, and certainly your passion. I just love the way you're smiling and laughing, and so happy about the changes that are happening in striping and what you're going to share with us today. And then we've also got Mitch Bartelt. Excuse me, Mitch. And he is the assistant traffic engineer in Washington County, a teammate of Tim. Thank you, man. Washington County is really kicking it out for us today. And he's been in the role for 2+ years as the assistant traffic engineer. Graduate of Michigan State University with a bachelor's and a master's of science in civil engineering, with 12+ years of work prior to joining the MnDOT team. So very happy that we have two subject matter experts that are going to share such a critical safety component piece of information on pavement marking. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Ethan and Mitch.
Thanks a lot, Dale. No, I'm excited to be here. I'm sure Mitch is too. And thanks a lot. Thanks a lot to our previous presentation. That was great, Tim and John. Pavement markings kind of go hand in hand with this, so it's good to get this off. I'm here to present. I'm Ethan Peterson. I guess I'll start with that. I am the state pavement marking and crash worthy engineer, as Dale let you guys know. I'm gonna be giving a presentation on pavement markings for the state of Minnesota roadways here. I guess I didn't have a safety model going into this, but I've always got one in the back of my mind when it comes to pavement markings. Pavement markings are one of the cheapest, if not the cheapest, systemic safety measures we can put out on our roadways. I'll give you some safety specs on this later, but I feel like that's absolutely the truth. Let's start out with the importance here. So in 2019, we had 364 fatalities in Minnesota. And of those 364, nearly 30% were run off the road crashes. Why this is important? Pavement markings can help that. These crashes are widely distributed across the entire state and local network, with horizontal curves making up a disproportionate amount. When looking at how spread out these are, you can't really tag it to one location most of the time with run off the road crashes. So a systemic safety measure has to be implemented to cover this. Road departures are especially prevalent on rural county highways, which is why MnDOT has advocated for local safety planning and provides a lot of HSIP money. And really, the big deal here isn't running off the road, it's what happens after you run off the road, right? You hit an embankment, you hit a tree, a lot of those things end up as a fatality or a very severe injury. Now, what's required of us for pavement markings? John gave a good intro to the MUTCD, or the Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices. In there, there's a few different levels of what's required, shall. So this is something that we all have to follow. There are shoulds, and that's something that you really should be doing, but you can go away from with engineering judgment. But still, I would say that's really close to a shell. And then there's maze. That's an option. So this is something you can kind of do to enhance it. So as far as the shells go in the MUT, which is what MnDOT affectionately calls the MUTCD. I know we're a little weird. For centerline markings, you have to have them in for all paved urban arterials and collectors that have a traveled way of 20 feet or more in width and an average daily traffic, or ADT, of 6,000 or greater. And also two-way streets or highways that have 3 or more lanes for moving motor vehicle traffic. And this is just the shells. The shoulds go a little more in depth. That would be urban arterial collectors of 20 or more, 20 feet or more in width, and an ADT of 4,000. And then also it says stuff for rural arterial collectors, 18 feet or more in width, and then an ADT of or more, and an ADT of 3,000 or greater. And then it goes on to talk about edge lines and what's required there. So the shells here are for freeways, expressways, and then rural arterials with a traveled way of 20 feet or more in width and an ADT of 6,000 vehicles per day or greater. And there's definitely the shoulds too, and that's for rural arterials and collectors with a traveled way of 20 feet or more in width and an ADT of 3,000 vehicles per day or greater. And then on other paved streets and highways where an engineering study indicates a need for edge lines. So what does that lead MnDOT to do, and a lot of other agencies? It's really due to the safety benefits here. MnDOT installs center lines and edge lines on all of their paved roads. And I think a lot of cities, municipalities, counties are doing the same thing because it's, like I said before, it's a really low cost safety benefit. And what's our goal here? We actually have a tech memo that we base a lot of our installation measures and maintenance measures on in MnDOT and in Minnesota roadways here. It's the MnDOT provisions for pavement marking operations tech memo. And what is that stating? That says that we have to provide an appropriate pavement marking on all highways 365 days per year. What's an appropriate pavement marking? An appropriate pavement marking is one that meets or exceeds the standards defined in the MNMUTCD. And then obviously, since we're a snow belt state, during winter weather events, pavement markings should provide presence after pavement is clear of snow and ice. That's an important one, especially in our area here. So one of the big things, what do we do for materials? So for each of the materials that MnDOT uses, we set an expectation for longevity. I'm sure a lot of people have seen this. I'll get to the flow chart that kind of helps us decide where we're applying all of this. But this gives you a general feel for how long things should last. And as you can see here, the latex paint is a pretty short time frame. You know, surface applied, we're not even calling it durable because a lot of times it won't even make it through a winter. And then our multi-component, which is generally slow dry epoxy, but in some instances we are using a modified epoxy and some polyureas, things of that sort. And then preformed polymer tape or thermoplastic. This is really going to give us longevity, and I would say that a majority of what we're looking at for thermoplastic is messages. And then one of the most important things, and kind of what dictates longevity is how long their retroreflectivity lasts. So this is their nighttime presence for the most part. Research has shown that the threshold between an acceptable and unacceptable pavement marking on nighttime driver visibility needs between 80 and 120 millicandela per meter squared per lux. Federally, the requirement's a little lower than what we have here. We adopted 100 millicandela per meter squared per lux for both white and yellow as a minimum. So as markings approach the standard or this level of retroreflectivity, we're looking at replacing it. And with that said, how we measure that is most of the time we do have district striping coordinators, and they coordinate with maintenance crews. They track the life of these markings, and they'll either near the end go out and take a look at it, do the sun over the shoulder test, get out there at night, and they've got a seasoned eye for this for the most part. And then if they're on the fence about it, we actually have an in-house mobile retroreflectometer that they can request tests on. So we're really trying to make sure that we're getting this minimum or above. I mean, really, we're looking for above that. I would say that about at 120 millicandela per meter squared per lux, you should really think about replacing it in the near future. And then with that said, with those longevity stated before and the minimum stated here, what we're looking for minimum initial pavement markings based on the degradation curve are these numbers as follows. Preformed tape, really high. That stuff's made in a factory, and it's really easy to control the production of this, and they get really high retro values on this stuff. And then everything else is kind of installer dependent, so it's a little lower. But still, these numbers, 300, 200, they're great in the field installed.
Ethan, can you help us understand the sun over the shoulder? How are you doing it? How often? Where are you doing it? Who's doing it?
So this is a Texas method. So you can actually, if you end up walking out there, you're looking at the pavement marking, make sure the sun is going directly over your shoulder. You can actually see the retro reflection or the glare from the beads. And you know, it's kind of subjective, but it'll give you a really good feel of what the retro would be at night. So I would say, you know, even after it's installed, you can take a look at it. You can get up close. You can see the bead patterns. One of our great resources is our pavement marking field guide or manual. I'll send that out. But Mitch was instrumental in putting that together, and I know too. A lot of this stuff he was instrumental in. So
John too, I gotta say.
Yeah, John too. Yeah. So yeah, I'm just kind of following in their footsteps. I'm trying to build on something that they've gotten on here. So I really appreciate that from you too. But yeah, so I can send that link out too. Maybe after I'm done speaking, I'll throw a link in the chat and we can post that somewhere. But no, that's great to see that. And with that, we have a flow chart that's built off of that. And it's kind of ever changing. I know it's updated a little bit here. We're going to update it a little more because there's things coming down the road here. And I'll talk about that stuff a little later. But so as it sits now, for longitudinal striping, there's a flow chart. So on new bit, and a lot of this, you know, depends on preservation, right? Are you going to do a chip seal within 3 years? If you're not, then you can do a higher, it's suggested you should do a higher durability marking. If you are, you know, you're going to do something that's a little less durable. We're talking about hopefully changing things to make and it's a little more than hopeful at this point. But getting a recessed wet reflective latex in, and I think we're moving toward wet retro reflectivity, and I'll hold off on that for a little bit. I'll go into that a little more. And then, as you see here, there's also new concrete, bituminous preservation projects, what you would expect to put down there. And then pavement messages are a little different here, you know. We're using preformed thermoplastic a little more. That's not used in longitudinal striping, but it's a great message material for a good longevity. And then I know contrast is becoming a bigger thing, even on concrete. We've been using a lot of contrast tape on interstates and concrete multi-lane freeways for a while, and even some two-lane two-ways, center lines. But we're also, I guess, something I was going to say for this too is that, so bike lanes and transit lanes are also becoming a bigger thing. Although we don't have many of them, we're kind of leaning toward the preformed thermoplastic or methylmethacrylate, affectionately called MMA, not mixed martial arts, of course. But then we've been doing that on a few demo projects. I know that some cities have been trying it out quite a bit. But I think that the bigger realm for bike lanes and transit lanes are like the Minneapolis, St. Paul, you know, the larger cities. Even the smaller cities are getting into it, and we're definitely going to see some bike lanes and transit lanes in the future for MnDOT. I'm not saying that, so we're preparing for it, but the bulk of it now has been the larger urban settings, the commercial business districts and stuff. So enhanced skid resistance, I kind of touched on that, but this is something else that's in the tech memo. This was a new thing that kind of got brought up here. Low skid resistance of pavement messages and colored pavements can really be a safety issue, especially in wet scenarios. We get complaints a lot. So to kind of combat this, we have something we're calling enhanced skid resistance, or ESR, pavement markings. And it is recommended for situations where deceleration, turning movements, or pedestrian and bicycle traffic is occurring. So a majority of where we're looking to use these are crosswalk blocks, pavement messages and roundabouts, bike lanes that utilize the colored pavement, railroad crossing pavement messages, stop lines, and stop ahead pavement messages. And this stuff is either achieved through something like preformed thermoplastic that already has a skid aggregate in it, or we're working with some districts on figuring out how it can be hand applied to messages in epoxy or latex even. Yeah. Very important thing that we're kind of talking about more and more. And then, as I brought up earlier, this isn't in the tech memo. This is something a little more cutting edge that's getting into our projects now. It's been talked about a lot. We've been requiring what we've called wet reflective pavement markings for quite some time, but there really wasn't an initial or minimum wet retroreflectivity established. So the big thing here is that we went through a study with TTI, and they went through and they did a human factors study. They polled a bunch of people. There were a lot of data points. I actually presented at a Northland ATSSA once or twice on this as we were going through, but this is kind of the results from it. I'm skipping through to that. So through a human factors study, it was found that 50 millicandela per meter squared per lux during the wet continuous testing is really what we need for a minimum emergency maneuver. So that's, I guess, that's the minimum we want, for you to be able to see it at 55 and having just enough time to make sure you're not going to run off the road or anything like that. But we would definitely prefer it higher, right? But wet retros are kind of hard to get now. But we are seeing that through our research that we can get a minimum installed of around 200 millicandela per meter squared per lux. And this would give us a degradation. Well, we recess a lot of pavement markings in Minnesota, at least for the state. And well, in Minnesota, it happens a lot. But anyways, in a groove, we had some wet retro readings. They looked at a degradation curve and they found out that about 200 millicandelas per lux will really give you 4 or 5 years. We're hoping maybe a little longer. It just hasn't been seen in the field, knowing what the installed value is. And that's one of the things with the special provision. We put together I've been working on a special provision, put it together. It's got into one project that successfully met the minimum installed rates. And it's going to be put into several others coming up here. The great thing about this is that if you're doing any mobile retroreflectometer measurements already, it's something that those contractors can do. It's not super expensive like a lot of this retro reflectivity. The mobile retro is great because we get that insurance of the installed initials. And I think as far as those dry readings go, we're getting about a penny a linear foot for our bid item. As far as the wet retro goes, the one place we saw it was around $2,500 for a 10-mile section, give or take. That was kind of the first run. It could be more, it could be less, but just as kind of a guesstimate for that. It's really, like I said, a limited use now, but I think we're going to be adopting it close to full scale coming up in the very near future because, like I said before, this is really what we've been looking for in wet retroreflectivity. We just hadn't had a way of knowing where it should be. So definitely great things.
Ethan, a couple questions if we could.
Absolutely.
Your thoughts on grinding for pavement marking and that may be related to adhesion to protection from snow plows. Is there a depth you recommend? Benefit for wet retro?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that we've gotten great durability from pavement markings that are ground in. They're ground in according to our spec is 70 mil plus or minus 10 mil. That way you can get about 3 installations of the pavement marking in before you have to regrind them. So typically that's getting us to a preventative maintenance where we don't have to go out and regrind it in, hopefully. But as far as wet reflectivity, we put it in a trough when we grind it in. So we found out that we really needed the wet reflectivity on that. And I think we're finding out that with these higher wet retros that it's, we're combating that and we're also getting exactly what we'd want on the surface too, as compared to a surface marking. So I think we're doing great things here and the grooves are terrific. I think we're probably paying about 10 to 15 cents a linear foot for the grind. And we're increasing durability a lot. I mean, for a latex marking, you can put like a high build wet reflective latex in a groove and get maybe 4 years. I know that's kind of been our suggestion for getting to a preventative maintenance sometimes, if it's that far out. And it'd be a good one, even if, you're 5, 6 years out, get a couple layers of the wet reflective latex out there before preventive maintenance. So yeah, no, I think the groove has saved us money and given us better, longer lasting pavement markings. Yeah.
Thank you. And another question, should striping specs be adjusted for chip seal pavements? Do you have recommendations?
Chip seal pavements. That's a challenge for pavement markings just in general. I think we're finding that we can grind in. You know, I think Vic Lund was presenting yesterday, has a great pavement marking program in his county. And, you know, I think what he's doing, at least from what I've heard, is that he'll put a chip seal down, he will put epoxy out there right away. The next season, he'll come out in the spring and grind in epoxy in his pavement marking wet reflective epoxy the next year, and that seems to work really well for on the chip seals. I guess as far as I know, we're also looking a little internally. We've got some projects with chip seals, kind of experimenting when we should be grinding in, what we should be grinding in. But I think that St. Louis County Vic Lund model is a pretty great one to do pavement markings with chip seals. So,
and here's a question for the city of Eagan, a comment question. We're getting away from safety lane tapers from and to the curb, now beginning 7 feet from face of curb, no tails. Is there any guidance for the beginning of the safety lane, such as a 2-foot taper dash?
To go to the turn lanes, is that what?
Yeah, yes. Getting away from the safety lane tapers.
Okay. I guess I don't exactly know. I might have to look into that a little bit more.
Maybe that's one for you, Mitch. If you're familiar.
Not 100% sure if I understand the question. Does he mean in terms of picking it back up after an intersection, or is it to taper for a turn lane?
Mm-hmm.
I'll read it again because I too need some guidance from you. We're getting away from safety lane tapers from and to the curb. They're now beginning 7 feet from the face of the curb, no tails. Is there guidance for beginning of the safety lane, such as 2-foot taper dash?
I've got to say, I don't know if I understand the question completely. I'll answer what I think the question is, but I'm only about half sure I'm right on this one. When we pick up the striping at an intersection, we don't necessarily have the full radius around that. We'll usually pick it right back up. Basically, when the radius ends, we want people to know that, hey, you're in no man's land here. We also think that there's a little bit of a concern in terms of autonomous vehicles. We don't want to guide people from the main line to the opposing radius there and think that's where you're supposed to go. So we don't necessarily connect the side street to the main line in all cases. The median, we might be more apt to do that, but on the right side of the road there, we usually just pick the striping back up right where the radius of that curve/curb ends, and that's where we start. In terms of a turn lane, though, when we begin the turn lane, we absolutely taper them out there. But again, we don't necessarily follow them around that radius to the new roadway that they're turning onto. Again, we want to communicate to the driver that isn't necessarily one continuous way to go there. You're going onto a new road, you need to pay attention and find where that new marking goes. So that's what we've done. Again, I'm only about half sure I actually answered the question. I'm not sure what the question was completely.
Thank you. So thank you for the question. If we responded correctly, wonderful. If not, please add more explanation and we'd be happy to come back to it. But I'll turn it back to you now, Ethan.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for fielding that one, Mitch. I appreciate it. And then, so wet retroreflectivity, what are the benefits? This is just a kind of a quick graph that shows that about 15% crash reduction on freeways, 25% reduction on multi-lane roads for run off the roads and wet night conditions. So it's significant. I know we've all been there. I mean, anecdotally, I can probably connect with everybody here in saying that we have completely lost pavement markings on roadways before during a heavy rain. I know I've been in this situation. I'm sure everybody else has, and we just don't want that situation to happen anymore if we can help it, right? And this is kind of just a quick video if I can get this to work. And you can see here, I believe we start with a wet reflective line here. Oh, dang it. Here we go. I think I got it this time. So as you can see, it looks pretty great. And then it goes to non-wet reflective right there. If you see that very quick transition and very abrupt. So this is the condition we're probably all used to, right? And this is what we're looking for. If we can get here, that would be terrific on most all of our roadways. And then
that's absolutely amazing. Thank you for the video clip.
Yeah, no,
absolutely, you're right. We're used to seeing it, but seeing that stark difference. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I can talk numbers all day, but really it doesn't make sense unless you have a visual sometimes, right? No, it's huge, and I think it's going to be a big deal once we start getting it on a majority of our roadways. And then I'm just going to kind of transition into here. I know that some people are probably familiar with what's going on with the update to the MUTCD. There is a notice of proposed amendment out there. One of the biggest things, I guess, is the shift to wider edge lines and center lines. So FHWA is proposing that 6-inch wide lines are to be used on freeways, expressways, and ramps, as well as all other roadways with speed limits greater than 40 miles per hour. So this is a big deal. The norm now is 4-inch pavement markings. The jump to 6-inch is I think I'll cover the cost later, so I'll just leave that for then. And then it also says that FHWA proposes a should statement for edge lines on 2-lane roadways should be at least 6 inches wide. So they're saying that most normal width lines should probably be 6 inches, at least as far as MnDOT goes. It's a majority of our roadways. And then the 2-lane, 2-ways edge lines is 6 inches. Now, why are they kind of going to that? Just in a nutshell, 6-inch pavement markings, there's a lot of studies, especially on the edge lines. Between these few large studies, severe crashes can be reduced by 20 to 40% by increasing the width of edge lines. Again, it's just helping with the runoff the road crashes. The wider lines, I think it lets, this is kind of anecdotal. It's kind of been seen. It gives a little more processing power to other hazards on the roadway. If lines are wider, it can kind of be something in the background as opposed to something you're focusing on. Research has shown that 6-inch edge lines provide a benefit to cost of around 25 to 1. Once again, pavement markings are one of the cheapest, if not the cheapest, systemic safety measures we can take on our roadways. Another big thing, if you're really helping humans, you're usually helping CAVs. That's mainly because they're modeling after the human eye. They're trying to get to a highly attentive driver in the cab world. So if you're helping in the human side of things, you're typically helping on the cab side of things. And like I said here, automated system cameras are akin to a highly attentive nearsighted driver. The geometry as far as sight lines go typically is a little shorter than what the human eye would be for the cab stuff. So the 6-inch pavement markings are going to help a lot. And then just kind of showing who's adopted the 6-inch lines. And it looks like for normal width, there's already 7. This is a little outdated. This is a year old. A lot of people are moving toward this in general. But as of, I think this was early 2020, late 2019, 7 states had already adopted 6 inches as a normal width. It's probably more. It's probably closer to the 10, I'd imagine, because I know Michigan's there, and a couple other states are probably there too. the cost difference, right? This is a big thing for everybody here. It varies significantly on material, obviously. A 6-inch edge line will cost approximately 25% more than a typical 4-inch edge line. So that's good news, at least, right? It's not double. It's not half as much even. I mean, it's mainly materials. The actual process of putting it down isn't much different. It's mainly just the additional materials. So the typical per mile costs here, you're going about $400 for latex, about $1,100 for epoxy, and then as you can see, just per mile, you're going up a little bit. And then I threw in what we really want to see there, just as a comparison. The 6-inch ground and what reflective epoxy is about $3,900 a mile, just because I've been talking about it a lot. It's always good to see what it gets paid for. And then kind of a last thing, the future things that we're looking at here. Like I said, enhanced skid resistance is a big deal right now. There's a study going on to look at the friction differential. So that's not only the skid resistance in the pavement marking, but what's the difference between pavement and the pavement marking? Because we really want to know, if you hit that pavement marking, are you going to slip? Are you going to grip? Or could it be around the same as a pavement? So it's a seamless transition. And then also product durability is working in there. These two projects are kind of wrapped up together. The pavement marking patterns and widths human factors study, and the assessing pavement markings for automated vehicle readiness. So these two things are looking at cycle lengths, pavement marking widths, and then some other things that I'm showing here. One of our highlight projects, I'd say, for the CAV readiness is going to be on I-94 between Monticello to Clearwater, which is west of the cities, in, well, I wouldn't say in between and the cities, but because it's way closer to the cities, but on that stretch of roadway. And what they're looking at doing there is putting 6-inch edge lines in, 6-inch lane lines, with a longer skip, so it'll be a 20-foot skip, 30-foot gap, a wider gore marking. Some of the gores will have the chevron markings in it, and then the dotted edge line extension through the exit ramps. So those are kind of the big things to look out for. I think that there's going to be a lot of great things coming from these studies. Mitch is also involved in this study too, so great things are coming. But other than that, I'll give you my contact information if you have any questions. If you'd like to reach out to me, always open to conversation. But with that, I'll finish up and I'll hand her over to Mitch.
All right. Let's see here. I want to make sure I share my screen.
Great presentation, Ethan. Thank you.
Okay. Does everyone see the full screen presentation?
Yes, looks great.
Fantastic. All right. So again, I'm here to discuss the Washington County perspective on pavement markings. My name is Mitch Bartelt, and I'm the Assistant Traffic Engineer for Washington County. So for Washington County, I know Tim Parkos gave already a little bit of an introduction here. I know we've got people from North and South Dakota, so you might not be as familiar with Washington County as people in Minnesota. It is the 5th most populous county in Minnesota, and basically it's the eastern suburbs. If you're looking at the county directly to the west is Ramsey County, where St. Paul is. The bigger one west of that is where Minneapolis is, Hennepin County. So most of the east suburbs falls within Washington County. There's quite a bit of varied topography, land use, highway types throughout the county. You have some very rural 2-lane, 2-way roadways in the northern part of the county. You have some exceptionally busy suburban areas. You have manufacturing, commercial. We have an oil refinery down by the Mississippi, the southwest part of the county. So pretty much almost the whole tract of what you can see in Minnesota, you can see in Washington County. And it is a really fast growing county. It's not the fastest growing. The last I checked, it was Carver County, which is even south and west of Hennepin there. But it's in the top 5 as far as fast growing counties. One big driver of that growth here is the new bridge just south of Stillwater, the St. Croix River crossing. This opened up almost 4 years ago now. It's a spectacular bridge. So it connects Highway 36 in Minnesota to Wisconsin Highway 64. And 36, if you're familiar with the metro area, ultimately connects all the way down to Minneapolis. And this new bridge, since that new bridge has gone in, traffic has increased on 36 about 30%. Projections where that would increase traffic, it's gone way above what even that projection was. So what that has done is given some spillover effect on county roads. It's given us quite a bit of more traffic that's gone to our county roads as a result of this too. So again, striping is really important. And this is a picture here of CASA 17 just south of Lake Elmo, both the city and the body of water. But again, it's an inexpensive portion of a project, but if you have bad striping, the public perception is that the job was done poorly, even if the rest of the job was done at a really high quality. That's kind of the last thing that you see, the last thing that's done, and one of the first things that you see. In low light and poor weather conditions, that's really crucial to the driver. If you're in a fog situation or nighttime in the rain, that's usually what you're going to use for guidance is that fog line. And as you can see here, this is, even though it's a rainy condition here, pardon me, even though this is really rainy here, this striping really pops out there. It's brand new wet reflective epoxy. And then I'd say signal timing and suggestions for where to put signals are probably the complaint that we get the most. Striping is probably next. So we generally follow MnDOT. That kind of provides a template for what we do. So what we found is that if we mirror MnDOT specifications, that really creates consistency and the contractors in the area know what to expect. We have counties in roadways in Washington County that has as high or higher traffic volumes than the nearby trunk highways. So one good example, if you're familiar with Woodbury, Valley Creek just east of 494, the last ADT we counted in 2019, that had 37,000 vehicles per day. Woodbury Drive just south of 94 has 38,500 vehicles a day. That's actually twice as much as nearly any part of I-90 in the state of Minnesota. So that's just a ton of traffic there. And what we've also found is for our residents have very high expectations for everything that we do in the county. They give us a lot of resources, which is fantastic, but their expectations aren't any lower for the county roads than they are for the MnDOT highways. There are situations where we pick and choose to deviate when we feel it's to our advantage. But again, we feel like MnDOT really provides that baseline and we kind of borrow from that. The county really, we use a limited variety of the materials that are all in the MnDOT QPL. So let's say if Minnesota DOT has a universe of options, we use a galaxy of them. What we also find is that the Washington County location is pretty advantageous for us. We feel like we get decent prices. A big part of it is we are by a lot of other projects that go on with MnDOT and other cities. So we're not that far away from the metro area, or we are in the metro area, but we're not far away from really anywhere. We're in the major population center. So even parts of our county that are somewhat remote, we feel like we do pretty well in getting good prices and getting good quality work. So life cycle cost, it's a consideration when we choose our materials, but it's not everything. I would say if we have to sum it up philosophically, we pretty much want to put down a marking, that initial marking, to last as long as it can. And we'll spend a decent amount of money to make sure that that happens. As probably anybody who is in any agency has found, and certainly we find this in Washington County, and that was the case when I worked for MnDOT too, it's almost always easier to spend construction money than maintenance money. Our maintenance budget is a little bit more subject to the ebbs and flows of budgets and economic conditions, but for construction, we can usually put that in a project and have it however we want. And again, pavement markings are a smaller portion of each project. So usually we've been able to have a high quality durable marking in our projects regardless of ADT. So like I said, we want to put something out there for a while and not have to restripe it for at least a while. The county and MnDOT, there are differences. The number one difference, and probably the biggest frustration, and the white whale that Ethan's chasing right now, I'm sure, and certainly I chased when I was there, and John too. We do not do as much preventive pavement maintenance as MnDOT. Really, quite a bit less. Seal coats, we do hardly any. Sometimes we do a microsurface, but usually I will know if that's coming. The person who decides to do the microsurface is 2 offices down from me, and that person will always talk to me about what do we do here, what should we do for striping, and have a long-term plan with that. One other big difference is that MnDOT obviously has a strong policy on rumble strips, and those are life-saving, really low-cost, life-saving installations. One thing with the county, again, we're a little bit closer, our government's a little bit closer to the people. Noise is a major concern, and our county commissioners are very supportive of public works and our projects in general. But gosh, that's one thing that we have to be very careful of putting those down. We have hardly any of them in there. We are generally more reactive with rumble strips, but it's one reason we go with wider pavement markings in almost all cases, because that is a good, low cost, very non-controversial safety method. Also, we are not governed by the...
From the audience, Mitch, if I can jump in, and maybe it's Mitch or Ethan or John to answer, but could you share some light on the rumble strips, rumble stripes for crash reduction? I know you're talking about utilization, but do you have any of the background information on how effective they are? If you have any statistics, comparison of crash rates before or after they were put in?
Yeah, so I know I've got some, and Ethan, please jump in. We know that with centerline rumble strips for cross traffic crashes, I believe those reduce crashes, fatal and serious injury accidents by something like 44%. It's just insane. It's a really good, that gives you that tactile feedback. It doesn't cost that much. Now, again, for our county, the dual concerns are noise and also pavement life. You cut into the pavement, you are hurting the pavement life. We think that might have some other, beyond the political considerations, some other issues in terms of budget and safety, secondary and tertiary effects. But yeah, they work really well.
They do. Yeah, and I guess I dropped a link in the announcements there. And that's just a general page for rumble strips and stripes, and great information. You can see some crash statistics. You can see that it looks like what we've found is it reduces crashes on rural 2-lane roadways by about 9% total, 12% all fatal and injury, 39% total crossover, 49% fatal and injury crossover. So you can just kind of take a peek at that, and there's some great information that our safety office has put together for that. If you guys are familiar with Derek Luer and company over here, they're really good with the crash statistics.
And I've heard John and others say that that sound is the sound of saving lives, to give people an idea how effective they are. Thank you for answering that. And if we could back up just a little bit on our question about the safety lanes, we do have a little more information. Yeah, you're spot on, Mitch. It's that area where we pick up when the radius ends. But that leaves an opening, and we're wondered if we should put dash dots at the ends.
Sure. No, that's good. I'm glad I got that question right. I'm pleasantly surprised I kind of fumbled in the dark and found that. So we don't want to do that. Again, I think I'd rather go with a solid line or frankly nothing. But one thing that we're going to have our eyes open for that research on autonomous vehicles. To me, that's going to tell us a lot of, that's always a big question I've had. And that was one thing I kind of inserted into the scope of that when we had our first meeting was, yeah, that exact issue. Where do you pick those back up again? I don't think dash lines would be the end of the world, but generally where we've put them in has been for cat tracking. So it would probably be appropriate for that. But at this point, we're going to leave those out and kind of see where the research takes us.
Nice response. Thank you. I'll let you continue on.
You bet. So obviously Ethan talked quite a bit about the MnDOT pavement markings tech memo. The county, we're not governed by that. Now I'll say that we, in spirit, follow it in terms of providing an appropriate pavement marking 365 days a year. You know, that's our goal. But we probably select which marking to use a little bit more on a project by project basis. Again, we just have to follow the MUT because we're a local agency. So like I said, we use a smaller subset of material choices than MnDOT has to offer. Primarily new construction, we're going to use ground-in wet reflective epoxy. So, and we even have some Northern County ADT roadways that are more like 1,000, 1,500. So like I said, it varies quite a bit, but if we can go out there and get that first marking to last 5-6 years, that's great. We don't have to go out there and restripe it. And from a life cycle perspective, it's a fantastic choice. And like I said, we have less to worry about in terms of preventive maintenance, you know, coming in 2 years having to cover that up. We don't do as many concrete roadways anymore other than roundabouts, primarily because the gas prices aren't at the $4 or $5 a gallon range anymore. So that's swung the pendulum a little bit back more toward bituminous roadways. But when we do have concrete for skips, we'll use that contrast tape because that's about as good as it gets. Those are really hard to restripe. It gives you really strong retro and contrast. Concrete roundabouts, now almost all of our roundabouts are concrete, however, and we want to put contrast markings down there. And for new construction, the preformed thermoplastic is really durable. Preformed thermoplastic stands up really well to turning traffic. It's probably about as durable of a marking as you're going to find with that torsional twisting motion on them. So in new construction, that's what we use. For restriping, for pavement messages, it's really latex or preformed thermoplastic. For long line, it is a lot of latex. Sometimes we have durable contracts that we put out. For restriping, every spring after the last snowfall and after that brine and salt is worn away, we have our personnel go out and do a night survey for longitudinal markings, and we kind of put them in 4 categories to determine the urgency and how much we need to restripe it. We do have our own pavement message crews for latex and preformed thermal. For latex contract, we just administer a contract for that every single year, and we've gotten great work and great prices there. We do a durable marking contract probably every other year. So that's to capture really busy roadways, anything we need to groove, and especially roundabout restriping. We don't do that every year because sometimes we don't necessarily need to, or it's kind of subject to budget. Basically, if we're going to throw it in our durable contract, it's traffic control kind of dictates that. If we just need to restripe a long line with latex, that's a little bit easier traffic control than if we need to do messages or grooving. And fortunately, we've had some of our contractors and cities have embraced night work. This is a picture of restriping a roundabout at Radio and Bailey, so CASAS 13 and 18 in Woodbury and Washington County. So this is night work being performed there. And we did work under traffic. It's a 2-lane by 2-lane roundabout. But again, this worked out really well in Woodbury, and Woodbury really embraced it because, you know, they have a lot of commercial areas where they would really rather have potential noise complaints at night than blocking up traffic all day. And, you know, our contractor's been really cognizant of not, you know, of being quiet and not being any louder than they have to. But again, we only had 1 residential complaint last summer, and we did 4 different roundabouts and a lot of work. So it really worked out well. So again, roundabout restriping is almost always our most challenging to restripe. And sometimes we have a situation where we'll put down, you know, these were 4-year-old roundabouts or 4-year-old striping in some cases that it was thermoplastic. It still stood up pretty well, but not consistently. But we needed to remove and replace it with thermoplastic. Roundabouts are more, the markings there are the most subject to the twisting movement, so there's a lot of wear. Roundabouts are incredibly safe. You know, you're going to see more of them, but one drawback of them is that it requires extensive traffic control. As a county, we decide we really want to be prescriptive with the traffic control setups. We feel like it's ultimately safer. It ensures it's compliant with the MUNT. And if we dictate that, I mean, it's really as much work for us to dictate it ahead of time as to check it, either after the contractor submits a traffic control plan or to check it in the field. But really what we feel like is that as a county, we're going to demand good work, but we're going to make this really clear and easy for the contractors to follow. We provide a level playing field. And I'm glad that Tim Park was presented this morning. I mean, I think that really dictates and shows the commitment we have to really good traffic control. Roundabout striping, obviously, almost all of those are in lighted situations, so presence is more important than retroreflectivity long-term. Thermoplastic obviously isn't quite as retroreflective as other options, but, and I know that we've kind of had more of a practice with contractors throwing beads on them, but thermoplastic stays there and hangs in there through different turning movements. So I'll kind of cut through this here. Like I said, we're really prescriptive, and I hope this shows up on your screen well. So we had 6 stages for this roundabout, and we said, hey, here's how you're going to close this roadway. This is the order you're going to do that. This is stage 1. Stage 2, we're changing the lane eastbound. Stage 3, we're changing that lane southbound. And then stage 4, they went westbound, and our traffic control subcontractor and our contractor last year, they combined some of these, so they did that eastbound and westbound closure, 1 and 4 at the same time. But again, we were incredibly prescriptive as to what to use. This is exactly what we expect. We had a lot of quantities in our SEQ, so it was clear this is exactly what you need. One other benefit of this was we gave the contractor one night from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. to do this work. And believe it or not, it took them almost that entire time to do this work. It's just really a lot involved with doing different traffic control setups and doing that work, but only being able to do one lane at a time. So we felt like we made sure that it was an efficient use of time to dictate this, so we didn't have to figure that out in the field. Surface epoxy, I would say 10 years ago, that was probably the material that MnDOT used the most when I worked there. We still use it, but it's more in specific cases as far as surface applied epoxy that we don't groove in. So this is, hey, we've got pavement that's not in good enough shape to support grooving, and it's not worth the cost of grooving. Generally, we'll just put down surface applied epoxy, because if there's ever a question if grooving is going to be worse for the pavement, I really don't even want to mess with that. We do some preventive maintenance in Washington County. So if it's a micro seal, if there's a crack sealing, if there's mastic application, there really isn't a good choice, but surface epoxy is probably the best choice. And usually that second application atop the first one does really well. Chip sealing, the same thing. I know Ethan got that question earlier. Our recommendation either is to go 25 mils thick on that first one, because you're going to have a lot of voids, or call for it once and then call for it again the next year, epoxy in both cases. And then you should be good after that. We really don't want to groove on a chip seal, because our people more interested in pavement will say, hey, I'd rather not cut into the pavement again. That's why I'm chip sealing it. One other thing is, hey, sometimes the project's really likely to run late in the season. Surface applied epoxy, we don't have to account for grooving in our schedule, and we can change to a fast dry or late season marking easier.
Mitch, there's another question on the grinding and the striping, and just elaborate a little bit more than what you had, Ethan. Do you find any difficulty with snow or ice removal in the ground in striping? Do you have it pretty much pegged now because of your depth? How are you doing there?
It's deeper than it used to be, and that seems to be working, would be my really quick answer. I don't know if Ethan has anything to add to that.
I haven't heard any issues, and I think that they do. There's the ability to clean it out pretty readily, it seems. I guess just not hearing an issue is a good thing on our end, because we typically do hear about the issues. So yeah. I think it's working. Yeah,
and the rubber blade can get in there and clean it out, but gosh, we'd rather, it's so tough. It's kind of the trade-off of, I'd rather that the blade not touch it, and it'll kind of clean out on its own. Or you can get in there and try to clean it out, because, wet reflective beads are generally not as tough as standard beads, So that's in part why they're not quite as durable, and in part why you want to groove them in to keep them away from the snowplow.
Thank you.
So one thing that comes up every year is late season striping. And this is something, Labor Day, you really want to have a plan as to what you're doing. How you deal with that and how you talk to that with the contractor. One thing, and I'll put this right out there. Is it the agency schedule that's causing that project to run late, or is it the contractor that's causing that to run late? It depends on the type of hand you're going to use to deal with that. But ultimately, you want to communicate with the contractors. There are times you get into tough situations. Part of it is just the weather has changed. This year, the weather in October was so much worse than November, for example. If you're in a situation where, gosh, we've got to get some striping down and winter's coming, I'd always rather have a day that's dry but colder than the manufacturer's specification versus wet and the correct temperature. But there are a lot of cases, if you're in a tough situation, just get that late season marking down in the fall, come back the next year and groove it in. That can be a good long-term answer. Sometimes it's more costly, but it's usually a win-win situation. Pavement marking inspection is obviously really critical. So is spotting, and roundabouts we spot quite thoroughly and clearly. My supervisor, Joe Gustafson, is as picky as anyone about where that belongs. And as you can see from Tim's presentation, we demand really good work out there. Our situation with the county, stripers, there's pride in the job. They do really good work. We've very rarely had problems. And I think we're fortunate for that, but also we try to be really clear in what we expect. But again, they want to do good work. If there's one time that we've had problems, it's the end of the year, where that contractor is under a lot of pressure to finish multiple jobs. They're dealing with weather, we're dealing with weather. And again, you have to remember that striper is usually a subcontractor, and the project schedule might not be something they can dictate or even have any control over. So for inspection considerations, I know I'm kind of running out of time, so I'll make sure I'm quick here. Retro is really clear. It's a clear standard you have in the specifications, and it's probably the quickest way to force replacement of a substandard marking is if it fails retro. But ultimately, it's not just about retroreflectivity. You want to make sure that the grooving and striping occur within product specifications for weather and whatnot, and groove depth, because it might pass initial retro, but it might not last very long in those cases. And again, traffic control is imperative for safety. I'd rather spend a little, if you need a tagline here, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If you can spend a little bit more money in traffic control, it's safer, it's more efficient for the contractors to do work, and you avoid claims. And that money spent in traffic control almost always will pay off in the end. Okay, hold on here. Now I'm messing something up. All right, so other quick striping things. We like to use temporary tape and other traffic control devices for temporary traffic control during traffic switches. We don't want to have scarring. We find temporary tape, I know it's somewhat expensive, but gosh, it sure seems to pay for itself. And it's just really a benefit. The other thing is if you have scarring on that top surface, it can really be misleading to drivers in rainy conditions, that they'll follow that old scarring instead of the new markings. We like to, if it's a bituminous roadway, we like to have that temporary striping on that second binder course, and then we will pave the wearing course to top that and have final striping so we don't scar it. We stripe edge lines and center lines on all rural roadways, just whether or not they're required by the MUT. I know Ethan touched on that. The only time we don't stripe that edge line is if we're in a city and there's curb and gutter, but we'll always have that center line. We have a restriping contract that we allow the cities and counties to buy into, so it helps them get a pretty reasonable price and economies of scale that they wouldn't get on their own. And again, if you have kind of a jack of all trades city engineer, that's something that we can kind of help be a partner and help take some of that off their plate about worrying about all the administering a contract. And then we believe in using prevailing wage for our striping contracts. We don't always have to, but it gives us more flexibility after the fact if we want to spend state aid money, if we do it to those state aid standards. The other thing is we just feel like we get really high quality work. we're still getting it at a reasonable price. So it's really ensure that we get qualified people and qualified contractors to do the job. And I've got my contact information here. I'm happy to send out some of the traffic control stuff that we've done for that, specifically for roundabouts. But otherwise, yeah, if there are any questions, I'm all ears.
Wow, Mitch and Ethan, wonderful stuff. And yes, anything that you share, we'll post on our website, the LTAP website. And a reminder that next week we'll be posting the presentations from the 2 days and the recordings. So great learning. Again, thank you, Mitch and Ethan. That was spectacular. So along with the recordings, we also have the PDH and Road Scholar. Again, a reminder, if you'd fill those out, send them back to us. We'd love to maintain your learning log for Minnesota and North Dakota. And big thank you to Denise for posting those, for Dustin and our team for managing the webinar on the 2 days. Spectacular job, team. Love what you've done. And then with the team, I'd like to jump over to John. John with SRF, helping us put this together. Great job. Your closing remarks, John.
I know we're short time, so I will be brief. I'd just like to thank everyone for joining in, and just to reiterate, see something, say something, and if you have issues, contact someone and let's work together as a team to get to 0 deaths.
Wonderful. Thank you, John. Love the tagline. We've all got them. That's one of my favorites. I'm going to be plagiarizing you an awful lot. And then to take us home, this is a Northland chapter mini how-to, and welcome to next year's face-to-face. Our president for the Northland chapter of ATSSA, Chris, if you'd take us home, please.
Sure. Thank you, Dale. This concludes the presentation for this March mini session. I want to thank all the presenters for lending their expertise to the sessions. And I could not end the day without a huge thank you to Dale and John. All the work and time that they put into getting these sessions going is greatly appreciated. When you listen to them both, you can feel their passion for keeping our roadways safe. And let's face it, there is nobody that can moderate a class like Dale. You are the best. Our next ATSSA gathering is scheduled for July 12th and 13th at Thumper Pond, which is located in Otter Tail, Minnesota. The 12th will be the how-to planning and with golf that afternoon, with the proceeds going to the foundation, and then the 13th will be our chapter meeting. We encourage anyone who wants to get more involved in the ATSSA organization to come join us. We are planning on doing a hybrid session this year, so for those that are still not allowed to travel at that time, they can participate. And the 2022 how-to, which will be our 30th anniversary, will be held March 14th through the 16th in Fargo. The chapter meeting will be held on the 14th. You can check out the Northland ATSSA website for details on both events, and I hope to see you all there. As Dale mentioned, develop your own personal tagline, safety tagline. I will end with the one I say here at Newman Signs to all those that tour our facility. We sell safety. And I can't end without the Northland's tagline, which is safe roads, save lives. Thank you all for your participation, and stay safe, everyone, till the next time.